Welcome to the Staff in Trenchcoat. I'm Raymond McDowell, here as always with my co-host Pope Jupiter.
Hello.
Today we are going to reflect on 19 episodes of the show. We're going to give a ranking to every book that we've gone through, and I guess we'll just essentially jump right into it. We might also spend a little bit of time just reflecting on the process of making the show at some point. I guess we'll probably save that for the end.
Yeah.
But, I mean, let's jump in. So, I think this is the first book, Knight Errant, by Paul Barrett and Steve Murphy. I was just saying this to you before we started. I think if I had given this some kind of a rating at the time of recording, it would have been really savage. But now I have the perspective of all the shittier books that were to come. And so refresh us on what was Knight Errant.
Knight Errant was the story of the Knights of the Flaming Star.
Yes.
A mercenary band of cops who were basically kind of the A-team as envisioned by someone who had frustrations being a spy. It was an alright story. It definitely had its... it was the first, but not the only instance of a female character getting literally objectified.
Yep.
And some other sort of subtle and not so subtle misogynies and the like, as well as just literal Christian mythology.
Literal I guess allegory.
I think that crossed over allegory into,
it went right past it.
Yeah, into just you're literally traveling through hell when you're going through slip space.
But it was fun. It was fun to read. The violence was gratuitous. There was a lot of child abuse, if I remember correctly.
A lot of child abuse, a lot of violence towards women.
Yeah, cheap, violent hooks to try and get the reader to feel something.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, and the story concluded. It was of a reasonable length.
Yeah.
Again, given all the other books that we've read, the prose was actually quite strong.
Yeah.
And there were relatively few grammatical and sentence level errors, even though I think I did lambast the book for it in the episode, but I did not know what was to come.
Right.
I was starry-eyed and new to the genre.
I think we complimented the dialogue and the prose in the episode that it definitely veered into Buffy speak and that kind of, but I mean the authors did a fairly good job of it. I personally would rank it like a C. I think
you're gonna give it a C.
Yeah. Oh. I think it's overall it's not the worst book we read.
Not even by a long shot. I mean, it became the meme that we used throughout most of the, I guess what we're now calling the first season of the show.
Yeah.
But again, that was mostly just for the meme value and the throwback value. We read a lot of stuff that was really, it was stuff that was on par with Knight Errant. And we also read a handful of books that were just objectively worse on every conceivable metric. Yeah. I'm going to give it a B. I think given everything else that we've read, and it's a B that's weighted by that it was just an enjoyable romp that was of an acceptable length and competent writing style with decent dialogue. If you can't stomach the propaganda, then I would agree that it falls to a C. But giving everything that we've been through, I'm going to give this one a B.
Okay.
So I guess I'll mark them down in that order. Then our second book was After the Revolution, Robert Evans, and this is a near future science fiction.
Yeah,
and I would say Knight Errant as well was just straight up science fiction.
Yeah,
I wouldn't say either of them was an urban fantasy.
Science fantasy, because I mean
Knight Errant had a little magic, so fine. Yeah, science fantasy would also.
If you're one of those people who, it has magic, so it has to be fantasy, which okay.
It's more spaceship than it is wizard.
Right.
But there is a wizard in it.
Yes.
However, after the Revolution is full on science fiction, near future. You've got your drugs and
cybernetic enhancements and
and the United States has balkanized, and it tells the story of a reporter and then a cast of characters as they navigate the dystopia that has ensued.
Right.
Extremely gritty writing style.
Yes.
Many swears. Much drugs.
Yes.
Much fuck jokes. I mean, there's even a guy named Skullfucker Mike.
Yes, Skullfucker Mike. Yeah, it's a serious story that did not take itself seriously, I think is the best way to describe it.
I thought that it was less fun than Knight Errant in terms of just the raw, you're just enjoying yourself as you read. There was more to think about.
True.
But the writing prowess of Robert Evans is significantly higher.
Mm-hmm. I mean, ideologically, we agree with Robert a lot more than we did with Paul Barrett or Steve Murphy.
Right.
And that is something that I think after the Revolution did, was it kind of showed not the plan, but a suggestion of what could happen if the United States did balkanize the way it did. Although we did point out that he kind of didn't seem to really consider the impact of the United States balkanizing the way it did on the rest of the world, because it seemed like the UK was just more or less business as usual.
Yeah, they were good to go. And we talked a lot about how a more interesting story might have been not after the Revolution, but during the Revolution. Yeah. And so that does knock it down a little bit.
Right.
But, I mean, what do you say? What's your...
I think it's S. I think it's S tier.
I agree. I think it's also an S tier. I would recommend that because I think the most important thing is I've never read a novel like it.
Yeah.
His writing style is very unique, and the things that he chose to emphasize were things that I could write 1,000 novels myself, and I would never write one that was quite like that.
No.
Whereas like Knight Errant, it had a lot of things about it that were you know, not even in a negative way, but just it was much more what you expect when you pick up a book.
Yeah.
Whereas Robert Evans has a very specific, very unique and interesting voice that he uses. So yeah, I agree with you. I think that's a double S from the Staff and Trenchcoat.
Oh yeah.
And then Way of Kings by Brandon Bridgerson. Brandon Sanderson.
Yes.
We did not like it.
No, that was...
It's a story about a bridge.
Yeah. I feel like we've read books that were technically worse, that had more and more gratuitous, more grievous prose mistakes, typographical errors, that kind of thing. And stories that had worse plots. I think that Part-Time Monster Hunter probably had... I think Pure Power or the two Nicholas Woodsmith or the Simon R. Green books, those three probably had the worst plots of any of them that we read.
Oh, we'll get there.
We will get there. But Way of Kings just kept hanging on. 1,100 goddamn pages.
Yep. And the other thing, I've thought about this a lot, and one of the key things that I've kept in mind is that I have never read a book that I liked so little from someone who was so well established and had so much money. He could have, if he wanted to, he could have taken 10 people and paid them all $100,000 a year for 5 years and only had them edit this book, and he still would have come out millions ahead.
Right.
At the time of publishing. As far as I understand it, I believe Way of Kings was after he had already become well established. I think that was the one he got an $8 million.
Yeah.
What do they call it? A front
advance.
But even if that wasn't the case, he had the resources to edit that thing to the nines, and then some, more than most or all of the other authors, with maybe the exception of someone like Daniel Abraham is a really well-established author. and
Simon R. Green is also
Simon R. Green. But for the most part, we were reading stuff that is not on that top echelon of, like giga successful star authors.
Like Ilona Andrews is a huge star in the urban fantasy community, but if you don't read urban fantasy, you don't pay attention to it, you probably never heard of her. Heard of them because it's a pen name of a husband.
Yeah, but if you've ever even gotten a whiff of a fireball,
you know who
Brandon Sanderson is, at least in the last 10 or 15 years.
Yeah, I mean 5 or 6 years ago when he agreed to write, actually it might have been longer ago than that.
It's got to be longer than that now. We're just getting old.
A book for Magic the Gathering.
Oh, okay. I thought you were talking about the Wheel of Time.
No, that was like 10, 15
Yeah,
years
that's what
ago.
I thought.
When he was contracted to write a book for Magic the Gathering, like it was a huge get. Everyone in the community was like, "Oh yeah, we got Sanderson," and that's the last I've heard of that. It was briefly a thing to talk about. No one's mentioned it since.
Did it get published?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And it created a character who's gotten 2 or 3 cards, but
and I can't even remember what was the main character's name. What was the guy?
Which one?
The bridge guy.
Oh, Kaladin.
Kaladin. So it mostly is the story of Kaladin.
Yeah.
That frames it, but then you've got several other points of view.
You've got Dalamar in there as kind of a background exposition.
That's how we get the point of view that's in the military and whatever else, and then you have the scholar group with I'm blanking on the name. Yasna.
Yasna, yeah.
And we found things to like. Shallan, yeah.
Yes.
We found some things to like.
Yeah.
But as I said in the episode, it was the longest 300-page book I've ever read. Yeah. I give it a D.
Straight F.
Straight F for you?
Too long. It was just too much. For the... Oh, what the hell you do? For the same reason I praise Knight Errant for its brevity. I gotta take away from Way of Kings for its verbosity.
No, if you're gonna read Brandon Sanderson, just read Mistborn. That one I read that several years ago now. I guess it I don't know, it might have been even as many as like 5 or 6 years ago. Perfectly enjoyable book, deserving of its accolades. Really interesting magic system, great characters, cool story. I can't imagine what he could have done in subsequent books in the, archive of the...
Stormlight Archive.
Stormlight Archive. I don't know what he could have done in the subsequent books to change my mind.
Yeah.
And even if the subsequent books were really good, they can't be good enough that there's a payoff for slogging through that 1,100-page thing. So again, as we've invited before, if you disagree, get in the comments. Fight us on Twitter.
Yes.
So on and so forth. We're happy to be convinced, but Way of Kings, Brandon Sanderson, F from Pope and a D from me. Do not recommend.
And it's not like Way of Kings is one that's recognized as one of his worst books. I've heard people wax poetic about the Stormlight Archive.
I feel like that's kind of viewed as his magnum opus.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. Okay. So Deathmaker. J.C. McKenzie.
Yes.
Our first actual urban fantasy, right?
Yes. This is the story of the necromancer in Canada who just kind of really wants to get laid and ends up getting into some messed up situations.
This was our first staff and trench coat gusher.
Yes.
Right? Yeah, we dug that.
I mean, we kind of glazed Evans, but we found enough to criticize there.
Yeah.
It was...
And we argued a lot about the use of profanity.
Yeah.
And the story itself. But I think we were just firing off ropes on the Deathmaker.
Yeah. I mean, it had good characters. It had solid representation. The dialogue was good. The plot made sense and was good. It was just all around what we were looking for.
Yeah, I'd still say it's probably the best urban fantasy I've read.
Yeah.
Definitely. And yeah, and it was the beginning of my arc where I was putting together my female character archetype. I'm a badass, believe me.
Yeah.
But this one did it better than any of the other ones
Right.
that we've encountered. I'm gonna fire off an S.
Yeah,
For that one. Is this a double S as well?
This is another double S.
Okay. Okay, next is the 5th season by N.K. Jemisin, and this is a post-apocalyptic. I guess it's billed as like a high fantasy.
This is the one with the ragas, right?
Yep.
Yeah, the where certain people are born with the innate ability
use cast.
Yeah, the innate ability to control the seismic activity in the area around them.
And other things,
yeah,
kind of. And when they do their magic, it freezes around them.
Yeah, and somehow these people are the oppressed class and like the outcasts and the people who everyone tries to persecute.
Yeah.
Despite having these abilities.
And this one also had the forced breeding.
Yeah.
That transitions into genuine affection and a
throuple.
And a throuple, as well as consensual child rearing.
Yes.
And I will say that I criticized this really hard. I had a lunch meeting with a couple of my professors from when I was in grad school. And one point that one of them made was that in some ways that maybe Jemisin was intentionally pushing those boundaries because she was, given the current climate, that she was one of the only ones that could push those boundaries. I don't know if that was a satisfactory defense for me.
The boundaries of like the consent and forced breeding and that kind of thing.
Yeah, because those are things that fantasy at large has been lambasted for. I mean, notably, all of the drama with the Game of Thrones TV show, so on and so forth, with all of the rape scenes, and throughout fantasy's history, there's been a lot of accusations. I would just say like people noticing the misogyny,
right?
And I felt like that the 5th season, if I did not know who wrote it, and I had just assumed that this was just another aging white guy that wrote a fantasy book, I would have lambasted this for being pretty misogynistic and pretty problematic. But maybe there were some ways to ameliorate that I just was, they escaped my field of view.
So to understand your professor's argument, Jemisin leaned into the misogyny to make a point?
Sort of. Yeah.
Okay.
I don't want to put words in his mouth.
Right.
Even though I explicitly just put words in his mouth. But that's part of why I'm not naming him or his institution.
Right. I don't want him.
But I mean, essentially, there was a pushback culturally, and then maybe Jemisin is playing with these ideas in a way that most folks would not be able to just play with them, and that maybe there are some elements of that escaped our critical lens.
Okay.
That could be useful.
I will bow to your professor's superior.
No, I'm not bowing to it. I just disagree. I thought those elements were cringe as fuck.
Yeah, because I'm thinking of like the way the book put most of the consequences on Alabaster for the situation, as opposed to being on the woman who had to bear his children unwillingly until the changeover. I feel like if you want to point out, if you, I don't know, that's not the kind of thing I would put in if I deliberately put in a misogynistic plot point like that, like to make a point. I would try not to have the story itself make the guy the more sympathetic there.
Yeah, and I guess maybe I'm misinterpreting what this professor was trying to argue to me as we were drinking beer and whatever else, and it was literally a 30-second to a minute conversation. But it seems like that towed very close to maybe she was just like being anti-woke.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, okay, I mean, I guess, but the end result was that like I felt dirty while I read this like really rapey, creepy fucking story. And then on top of that, the magic system was kind of lame.
Yeah.
And the action was meh. And the way the story was constructed, I think you liked a lot more than I did.
Yeah.
I grokked pretty early that we were getting three different periods of the same person's life.
Yeah, I thought we were getting two different people, if not three. And it wasn't until very late that I realized that it was the same person in three different stages.
Right.
Which I think is a good thematic choice. I don't know that enough was really done with it in that book, but again, this was another first part in a series. Because doesn't it end with Alabaster asking her, have you ever heard of the moon?
Yeah. So also just really lame ending.
Yeah.
Yep. I didn't care for it. What's your
D? I don't think it's quite bad enough to warrant an F, but it's definitely D tier.
I'm gonna give it a C because I think that given the degree to which it has received academic attention makes it interesting enough that you might just want to have it under your belt
Yeah.
as a reader of fantasy. And so I'll give it the C.
The barely passing grade.
Yep. Magic Bites by Ilona Andrews. Which one was that?
That was the one in I described it variously as post apocalypse in Atlanta. With
this was the one with the zombie bone dragon.
Yes.
And the werewolf.
Yep.
Guy.
Yeah, Were-Lion.
Were-Lion, excuse me. And were-rats and so on and so forth.
Who the were-rats are too ugly for her to fuck.
Yes. And there's one kind of really creepy, like quasi furry scene that she didn't go all the way, and I was disappointed. It didn't fuck.
Yeah.
And this is a series, right? Magic Bites was book 1.
It was one that I read the first few books of years ago, and I remember enjoying, and coming back to, I see how much I've grown.
Yeah, I don't remember the writing itself being that bad.
No,
I think the dialogue was passable.
Yeah, but it was another one of those, I'm a badass, believe me.
But not done well.
No, just hints that she's stronger than she should be, and her just arbitrarily surviving situations that she should have no business, as far as we can tell, surviving.
And she had the sword.
Yeah.
She didn't she put it in a fish tank and feed it or something?
Yeah.
Yeah. Which just kind of wasn't cool.
It didn't really do anything. It was just kind of a sword.
Right.
If you gotta feed it, it should like talk to you or something.
And she does some magic towards the end. I think she does a fireball.
They had the words of power that like she accidentally reads, and they like sear themselves into your brain.
Yep.
I remember us having a discussion about like, so do you have to deliberately like imbue power into those, or could I like write those down and be like, do you have the will to master these, or are you about to go nuts, buddy?
And was this the one where there was like the super baddie that emerges, and he's like force breeding people, and he wants to force breed her?
Yes. That's who I forget what it was, but like I remember now. It was like Ophir or something like that was the name of the creature. And I remember, because by the time I got to the end of it, I'd forgotten the character who ended up being like the bad guy at the end.
Right.
Because he gets introduced at the beginning. And I remember going back and listening to the first couple of chapters, and when he's introduced, he's telling her about the thing he is.
Right.
It's like that scene in the only thing I can think of. Forgive me, Father, I am sinning. Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban.
Oh no, I think this was the episode too where we did a huge long Harry Potter bitch fight.
Could be, but there's the scene when Lupin is out for his lycanthropy and Snape takes over the Defense Against the Dark Arts class, Snape assigns a section on werewolves. And like if you're reading through it the first time, you don't know what or who Lupin is, you don't know anything. It's like, oh, Snape's just being an asshole. But then you read it the second time and you're like, oh, Snape was trying to expose Lupin there. And it's the same thing reading through it, except somehow more obvious that this guy is, because he's like, hey, you ever heard of these things? They're really neat.
Really, really neat, dangerous.
Yeah.
Turn to page 172.
Yeah. And also, so the main villain of the main book wanted to, but there was also a short story included at the end of the audiobook that I listened to.
Oh no, didn't too long, didn't read.
That was basically this like shapeshifter super information broker who wanted to fuck Kate Daniels.
Well, everybody wanted to fuck Kate Daniels.
Yeah. She was the most irresistible allegedly plain-faced merc in Atlanta. Even though she, like, it's kind of funny when I hear the description, it's like, oh, so you're describing like this sort of pseudo-Eastern exotic beauty in this character, like with the almond eyes and the fit body and all that. So
yeah, there is a lot of that where they, because I mean, again, this is a, indescribably hot random chick with all kinds of eldritch power that just kind of goes on a lame adventure.
Mm-hmm.
And then randomly there's a dragon monster.
Yeah.
At the end.
A dragon monster that fortunately is driven by a number of regular dudes.
Yeah, that's right.
Not defended.
It's a caravan.
Yeah.
So what do you give it?
Man, I'm gonna give it an F. I got nothing to recommend about this book.
I was gonna go C.
Really? You know, I expected coming into this for you to be harsher on the books, and so far I've been the one who's been like, oh, this fucking sucks.
Yeah, you're the savage. Age of Ash by Daniel Abraham.
This is the one with the city that was like a character?
Yes. This was the scatological reference, the novel. Lots of poop. We had a fun time with that.
I remember enjoying it.
Yeah, it was okay.
Yeah, it was not. It was definitely a middle of the road book.
Yeah, it was underwhelming given the author's pedigree.
Right. I mean, I remember the city definitely was a pretty decent character as it was.
Yeah. It had a shit ending.
Yeah.
The bad guy just like gets pickpocketed.
Yeah. And then is still in power and still like a threat. He just doesn't have his magical key or magical dagger of
and the untrained, like with no setup whatsoever, the main character is able to just like complete an advanced like magical ritual with this dagger.
Yeah, and talk to her brother.
So the end was pretty underwhelming, but it was written. The guy's prose were impeccable.
Yeah,
and it was an enjoyable story, but just unremarkable.
Yeah, and the characters were interesting. I did think that.
Well, I just kind of literally said the opposite of that. It was unremarkable.
I thought that the one girl who was in love with the main character.
I'm not going to remember the names.
You called her something funny.
Yes.
But
Sandwich.
Yes,
Sandwich.
Her name is Sandwich. You called her Sandwich. Yes. Yeah. I thought she was pretty well done.
Okay. Well, I don't care. I give it a C.
Yeah, I think I'm actually going to go with a C as well. Like I said, middle of the road.
Okay.
It was not a. I'm not upset I read it like I am with Way of Kings or Alona Andrews, but it is what it is.
For love of magic.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean, we could just sit here and shit on it. It was the worst book we read, and it wasn't even close.
No, and I feel I owe a double apology because like I picked this because this was another one I read a bunch of Simon R. Green years ago, and I remember enjoying them. And full disclosure, I have not gone back and read any of the stuff I read before to see if this is a, he got worse or if I got better. But For Love of Magic was just so bad.
Yeah, there's no redeeming qualities, and I don't even think we just shouldn't fuck with it. This is an obvious like double F.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just
get it out of the way so we can talk about books that are worth talking about.
Yeah.
Such as Witch King by Martha Wells.
This was the one with the like demon guy.
This was the one that I thought was going to be a pirate story, but it wasn't.
Right.
And instead it was kind of this...
It was a travelogue.
Travelogue. Yeah, we made fun of it. There was a lot of boat scenes that it was just travel. And then there was the dinosaur things they rode on.
Yeah.
There was a lot of travel.
It was discussion about the things they rode to get to the thing they're currently riding on, that they're going to ride to get to the thing they're going to ride on next.
Yes.
Like that's the thrust of the story.
But it had cool characters.
And it had an interesting world with a sort of like this kind of pseudo, I almost want to say almost anarchist like.
Yeah.
This is an oxymoron, but it seemed like the phraseology they were using, this almost pseudo anarchist like state that had fallen into corruption, and like the book is about him learning about this corruption, what has happened, and then finding out at the end that he fixed it 5 years ago.
Kind of, yeah. And they had Power Ranger style teleporting baddies. The magic was weird, but it was an interesting system.
And I think there was some interesting stuff about gender there, because like Kai was a male no matter what body he possessed. But there did seem to be some differences between possessing a male versus female body.
And there was a lesbian couple.
Right.
As well.
And also there was the interesting thing where he possessed I forget what it was called, one of the priests or something of the...
Yeah, there was some interesting interplay there.
And he fundamentally changed his like magical soul, because he lost some abilities but gained some new ones. It was kind of an interesting...
and there was the Underrealm, or whatever it was called, with the demons.
I think this was one where again we kind of identified that while it was an interesting story, there was maybe a more interesting story in the development of the demons and the like nomad people that I forget what they were called.
Yeah, I can't remember the faction names.
Yeah.
But yeah, there was a more interesting story that was alluded to instead of told.
Right.
Definitely. But I feel like it was an okay book.
Yeah, I think I'd give it a B.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna just kind of tag along with you. I think that's a solid B. Pure Power, Nicholas Wood Smith.
I'm going to be apologizing for the next few of my entries here, so I'll just get this one out of the way, because this was my attempt to find an urban fantasy book where the protagonist wasn't some sort of law enforcement person, and instead I found something worse.
Indeed.
Because she starts out okay. It's this and honestly, I think it would have been fine if it was this MASH style medical story, where they're constantly in the emergency room, the OR, they're having to deal with that. I mean, I don't know if you watch it.
I don't like MASH, but if she had just not left the healing covenant thing, and it was just a story about her adventures doing that and trying to survive and wanting to become more of like a combat specialist instead of just a healer, that could have been a cool story.
And maybe she spends this book learning how to use her abilities in combat, so that in the second book she can, become the combat medic or whatever. Instead, she just leaves and discovers, I can just like shine my light and it'll destroy the
ash demon.
Evil. Yeah.
And then this is the one where at the end of the book she just like defeats like a pinnacle super demon.
With one of the few redeeming things, I think the idea of staring down a demon and learning its true name can give you power over it, but it will often destroy you. I think that's a totally cool like narrative mechanic.
Sure.
But I think that just having her be able to just stare down a demon like that, it's not earned.
No, it didn't feel earned at all.
She's not someone she's really not someone who's shown a great deal of strength of will. she just kind of does what she wants, and doesn't worry about, and ultimately going to quitting the school and joining up with the mercenary band was the easy way out, because yeah, she had the one paladin who was telling her not to do it, but part of the catalyst of her leaving was him dying.
Right.
So the person in power who was like, no, you need to stay as a medic, that's where you belong, was gone. So she could have tried to, get the proper training, but instead just, oh no, I don't need training. I'm just good at this on my own. Pew, 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 pew.
I think that about says it.
Yeah, F.
I'm going to give it a D.
Really?
It's not as bad as For Love of Magic.
Okay. I'm staying with F, though.
All right, then Everking by L.J. Andrews. This one's, I think, so far is going to be the hardest one for me to give a letter grade.
Yeah, this was the closest we've gotten so far to swashbuckling pirate fantasy.
It still wasn't there, but definitely the closest that we got.
Right.
But, it just happens that I listened to the first 5 minutes or 10 minutes of that episode the other day, and I start off extolling the virtues of the book.
Yeah, I was a little bit wrong. I remember being a little bit wrong-footed because you were like, yeah, I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a good book. And then you were like, and it's full of abuse. And I was like,
yeah, so if you can just close your mind and not care about anything that matters, then it's definitely like an A, maybe even an S. Because it's a really cool story, interesting world, good characters with development, some surprises, nice battle scenes,
and I think the magic is pretty well thought out.
Yeah.
It's a really good story that is unfortunately completely destroyed by the romance element, which is unfortunately pretty important to it.
Yeah, and it takes up a lot of the page space.
Yeah.
And then it has the white ropes.
Absolutely.
The gratuitous sex scenes, but as we pointed out, the descriptions of the male are full smut.
Yeah.
But then really weirdly chaste descriptions of the female form.
I felt it deep in my cock as it twitched. But then I bared my sex to him.
Yes. Oh, my center. That was weird.
Yeah.
But it fucked harder than any of the other books we've read.
That is absolutely true. I think the only one, I mean, Silverblood Promise tries, but it ultimately is just all talk and no action. Yeah, it definitely is the book that fucks the hardest.
Yep. I mean, it's definitely the only one that even approaches descriptions of ejaculate.
Yeah. And isn't there a scene where she licks up his cum like a cat?
Yeah, it's full smut.
Yeah.
I think I'm gonna give it an A. Because it was a.
I'm gonna go with B, just because I found so much of the smut amusing. I remember talking about how much I was walking around listening to it. God, I hope no one listens to this because I will lose my job. But this is the funniest thing I've heard in years.
No, I'm giving it an A for abusive.
Absolutely.
It is a problematic A.
Yeah.
For me, but your B, I think, is also a respectable option. Part-Time Monster Hunter, the Cat Drummond series by Nicholas Wood Smith.
Sorry.
Yeah, this was a cringer.
This was,
I think this was the one where the main character hates protesters, and it had a bunch of just really weird right-leaning political elements that felt.
Well, and then we learned about the author.
And then the author leans that way in real life, but the story sucked.
I rubbed my eyes and realized I was still covered in blood. I looked at my arm and saw it was still covered in blood.
Yeah. Let me see. How do I want to phrase this? What was the one that was the worst? I'm scrolling back up.
Way of Kings.
For Love of Magic.
Yes.
That one was the worst book. It had the cheesiest dialogue, the shittiest story, but it was mostly grammatically sound.
Right.
There were parts of Part-Time Monster Hunter, like the one that you just paraphrased, where it just hadn't been fixed. Like it was, there were run-on sentences and
sentence fragments galore.
Yeah. Oh yeah, this was the one where over and over they used the construction of just a verb and then some stuff as a sentence. Went to the store, had a peach, got home. That type of a construction, but just over and over, and it just sucked. F for fuck you, Nicholas.
Yeah.
Terrible book. I wouldn't recommend it to anybody.
Also Free Palestine.
And Free Palestine. The Ember Blade. The Darkwater Legacy by Chris Woodings.
Yeah, this was a solid one. This one had...
no, this one was a slapper.
Yeah, this one had grub.
This one had grub, baby.
Yeah.
Hell yeah.
I mean, it definitely started out weaker. But I think once we got to the other side of the... I forget what it was called.
What was it called? The Moria analog thing. It was something, it was like Drakkenberg or something. I can't remember what it was called.
But once we got to the other side of that, I think it really opened up. And it became a really enjoyable book.
And it had the double, the betrayal tease and then the real betrayal.
Yeah.
And it ended on that, I think the only, out of all the books we've read, the only legitimate tearjerker out of an ending that we've encountered. And it even had a song in it where the poetry was just good.
Yeah.
This one was a slapper. I enjoyed it a lot.
Yeah.
In fact, I can't think of another one where the next time I get an opportunity, I would just continue this series myself for pleasure, totally outside of the podcast. Yeah. I intend to read more.
Are there any more out yet, or was that the first one?
I think this one was relatively recent, but I think the second one is coming out or just came out or somewhere in that range.
Okay.
I mean, this one gets an easy S.
Yeah, absolutely.
From me.
Grub alone.
Alone. Everyone should experience Grub. John Dies at the End by David Wong.
A.K.A. Jason Pargin. Yeah, sorry.
We didn't like it.
No, it was... I maintain that it was very much a novel of its time. And that we've just seen a lot of shift in what is considered acceptably funny over the last, 15, 20 years. That said, even ignoring the kind of naughty's humor, the story was just kind of weird.
It was weird. It was very body horror.
Yeah.
And I didn't like that. And the characters were flat.
Yeah.
And the style was not to my taste. The prose.
Yeah. Jason Pargin is someone who I have encountered in podcasts, and he's usually pretty funny there in a very dry way. This was...
There were a couple funnies.
Yeah, for sure.
There was the whole section where it was at the very beginning of the book where he's, yelling at the ghost. He's like, oh, I'm all alone. It's dark up here. That was okay. I enjoyed that part, but overall, like, I didn't enjoy reading it. It was a chore to get through.
Yeah.
And the payoff was pretty small.
Yeah.
The payoff was pretty small. I think for me, it's a D. I'm not going to disrespect it with an F because it was a well written book that I did not enjoy, but it's a D from me.
Yeah, I think I'm going to piggyback on it. It's a D as well.
Double up.
Yep.
A Tempest of Tea, the Blood and Tea series by Hafsa Faisal.
Yeah, this one. This was the young adult one, right?
Yes, and wasn't this the one that we both were just like zoned the fuck in? It was great, and then the last like 10%,
yeah,
it just shit the bed, and we were out.
Yeah.
there was a lot to enjoy, and it was the vampire story, which we hadn't encountered.
It seemed to subsume a lot of the sex and violence the story wanted to into blood and vampirism.
Yeah, we criticized that a little bit, and we suspicion that there were some projection of real life conservative values on display there. But I don't look back on reading that book as a waste of time.
No.
And it was a pretty good story. There was a lot to like in there, mixed in with the less awesome elements. Yeah. And the quality of the prose was just fine. Yeah. I would even say it was definitely above average, but maybe verging on great.
Yeah. I remember the relationship between Flick and the dude.
Yeah, I can't remember his name.
Yeah. That felt skeevy at first because I wasn't paying attention to their ages, and I thought that the dude was like pushing 30 or 40 and Flick was only like 18. So it felt like this kind of, but no, they're actually only a couple of years apart, but still maturity wise, there was a big difference. Felt skeevy for him to be like pursuing Flick.
And there was the random kitten.
Yes. Yeah, the ninja cat burglar thief who took a cat with him everywhere because it was quieter than everyone else.
And I liked the idea of the T/Blood house. That was kind of cool. But the ending was, for me, it was so bad that I definitely can't give it an S or an A. Mm-mm. And I'm not inclined to even give it a B. I think I've got to just give it a C.
Yeah, I think I'm going to... C is about the best I can go with on that. It was an enjoyable read until the ending. And I think this kind of started that, like, with the exception of Tusks of Extinction, we kind of hit a pocket there towards the end of just great books up until the ending.
Yeah, guys, just your authors that just couldn't finish us off.
Right.
We just couldn't come at the end. So it's
blue balls all the way.
Fucking a double C for A Tempest of Tea. The Tusks of Extinction by Ray Naylor.
This one was really good.
Yep. This was powerful literature.
I think we both agreed that if it had been much longer, it would have been difficult to get through.
Yeah, because it was rough. It made you really depressed.
Yeah.
It was heavy.
But
because really this was an eco fiction. Mm-hmm. There were some science fiction elements.
Right.
But this was very much an ideological piece.
Yes.
And he lays it on thick.
Yes.
It doesn't stop. It makes you sad from the first chapter to the last chapter. There's an interesting story that happens with the characters. They do develop. Mm-hmm. And I was moved by it. I don't regret reading it. However, I don't know that it's something that I can't strongly recommend to a fantasy or sci-fi readership.
I think it's important to read, but also it is a depressing read. So, make of that what you will. I think it's important for people to read stuff like this, but I understand if it's not something you can deal with.
Yeah. I'm going to give it an A.
Yeah.
With the asterisk of if you only like fantasy and sci-fi, it's more of like a C or a D.
If you're looking for escapist literature, it is an F.
Yes.
But if you're looking for something that will make you feel something and learn something, I don't think there are many 100 pages you could read that would do more.
Absolutely. So are you going with me? Is it a double A?
Yeah.
Road to Ruin, the Mage Bike Courier, Book 1 by Hannah Lee.
Yeah, another one that was pretty much solid up until, in my case, up until the last page almost.
And what was it that pissed you off at the end?
It was the way she just kind of walks out, they let her, she walks out into the street, and the book just ends.
Yeah, I think you were more mad about that than I was. I just thought it was a fucking slapper. I loved the mage bike mechanism. The magic system was cool. The fucking magic potions. I
Yeah.
loved the way that the author left some space to introduce new powers.
Mm-hmm.
I liked the dystopian, tons of little small cities. That's another thing she can. Yeah, Hannah Lee. I think that's a woman.
Yep.
She can expand on that later and add new cities.
Yep.
And the waste itself being kind of a character. It had the a pteropter
Uh-huh.
character that was fucking cool.
And the way the if you drink from the same monopool, it will eventually like change you so you can
Yeah,
tell when someone is from a certain area.
yeah, lots of really interesting, well thought out
Yeah.
systems at play, and the the build up and all of that to the climax of the novel I thought was really good. I I got to give it a. I don't know if it rises to the glory of a true S tier.
It's definitely a solid A. I think I'm gonna go with A, because it again that ending really did sour me. I mean, the rest of it is fantastic. I think that the conflict, the way they set it up, is primarily a just trying to get the two star-crossed lovers together, and then it ends up being about. I mean, it kind of comes down to hoping the survival of uh, the little cities.
Right.
So yeah, it's a nice, reasonable escalation.
I don't know. I really enjoyed it. I'm gonna give it an S. I'm
Okay.
gonna put. I think it does. Now that I'm sitting here thinking about it, it's as good as the other books that we've given S's to. I think I enjoyed it in the same ballpark as Ember Blade. So an A from you and an S from me.
Yep.
The Book of Doors by Gareth Brown. This was the one with the ultimate god power
Yeah.
book that allows you to go through time and space and blah blah blah. And there was a suite of other books that had similar powers. You had the ultimate mustache twirling cheesy villain.
Yes.
This was a stinker.
It was.
In the end, it just there was some feels with the story of Mister. What the fuck was his name? And it popped up so many times. It was
Yeah.
the death of Mister Blank,
Right.
and then it came back.
Weber.
Mr. Weber.
Yep.
There was some feels with that and with her grandfather, but I don't really read fantasy and sci-fi. This was like it was like Hallmark Channel
Yeah.
feels type thing, and so it was moving, but it was also kind of unwelcome. And but as far as the fantasy stuff, absolute ball drop.
Mm-hmm.
And the books were either way too powerful or just not cool.
Yeah.
And
It's funny because we had that discussion about story ruining powers in stories shortly before we started reading this, and then I read it, and they were talking about the Book of Doors and how it can travel through space, and then there was some mention about traveling through time. I was like, no, they're not dumb enough to put that power in
oh,
here.
and they go hard.
Oh, incredibly hard.
Just full time paradox
Yeah.
nonsense. Uh, nope. And the prose was solid. It was well written,
Yeah.
but it wasn't for me. It wasn't for me. I didn't like it. I'm gonna give it a D.
Yeah, I'm gonna go ahead. I don't think it's quite bad enough to warrant an F, but it's not. It doesn't redeem itself enough to warrant a C.
Right. All right, and we've made it to the end. The Silver Blood Promise by James Logan. The most mid of mid books,
Yeah.
maybe that I've ever read.
Like,
And this was the one that was a debut that Tor picked up.
yes, this was one where I remember when we started reading it, we were like, wait, who published this one? Tor. Oh, okay. So we're thinking we're sitting down for a classic of the genre.
Yeah.
And we got. I was just thinking the fact that it's called the Silver Blood Promise, and when we get that title drop in the book, we find out that he's supposed to make a gold blood promise, but he doesn't have any gold. And like, cheaper the metal cheapens the oath. And that kind of feels like what this book is. It was supposed to be the gold blood promise, and that was a banger. But he didn't quite get
there. We got the B real.
Yeah, we got the cheaper metal. Yeah, it was just, and now thinking back on it, it started out as I mean, the main character, whose name is irrelevant, is this
fantasy character A.
Yeah, I think the author tried to make him like Bruce Wayne Batman.
Oh, okay. I hadn't considered that, but yeah, I could see that.
Well, disgraced son of a
aristocrat
goes out to better himself, but instead of actually bettering himself, he just was like a scoundrel in a bar. There's no indication that he was like this master swordsman or world-class gymnast or athlete, or he was just,
and it was a long list of him just finding exactly the right person for the really obvious setup in the narrative over and over and over and over.
And for someone who talks like your typical fantasy, he talks like he's an Aragorn or he's a Geralt or whatever. He is constantly getting saved by a 10-year-old girl.
Yeah, well, you liked Flea a lot.
I did.
I didn't. I thought that was also just like mild comic relief, side character, copy paste.
She definitely is a bit of that.
It's maybe this will fall on deaf ears. I don't know if you've ever read any Dragonlance.
No.
But if anybody that's listening to this has, it's like a really dumbed down, shitty version of Tasselhoff Barefoot. It was just, there just wasn't anything that was deeply interesting about the book, and the few things that did intrigue me are not explored.
No.
There was the twice crowned king and his underground labyrinth with a monster in it.
We got promised twice.
Yeah. And we never get it.
And we got blue balls both times.
Yep. And they don't really explore the what was it, the dark hand, the ebon hand.
Yeah.
I wanted more of that, and we don't really get it. There was a couple cool artifacts that show up. There was the pyramid game at the beginning that was kind of cool, but again, it was just it's so mid that it gets a lower than mid rating from me. I give it a D.
I'm going F. It was just not, and I remember when we got to the end there, and there's the whole they're stealing the blade because the fucking faceless
and the whole scene where she's got the sticky gloves on the top of the car. Oh no.
Yeah. I think I was just looking for something to latch onto, and she was the closest thing to a worthwhile character.
Yeah. So an F from you
and
a D from me. So then our top 5, with an honorable mention for Everking that you gave a B and I gave an A. We've got After the Revolution by Robert Evans, Deathmaker by J.C. Mackenzie, and then The Ember Blade by Chris Wooding, and then The Tusks of Extinction, and finally Road to Ruin.
Yep.
And I mean, those are 5 books that I would recommend to anybody.
Yeah.
But particularly if you are a fantasy or sci-fi or urban fantasy reader, these are all slappers, obviously with the exception of Tusks of Extinction being, you have to stretch.
Yeah. Again, if you're just looking for some escapism, something to take your mind off the troubles of the world, Tusks of Extinction will do the opposite.
Tusks of Extinction.
Let's take that again from the top.
Yeah.
If you're looking for something to escape, some escapist literature, something to take your mind off the troubles of the world, Tusks of Extinction is not the book to read. It will only make you more miserable and depressed about the world we live in. But if you're looking for a good, interesting story about some of the problems in our world. Tusks of Extinction is great. I think he did that title on purpose.
He must have just to trip you up.
Yep.
Absolutely.
But yeah, I think we're definitely going to put some Ray Naylor on the short list for next season because he's got some more traditional fantasy that. Because his prose was good, his characters were interesting.
Yeah, it was
the
really
plot
good.
was fantastic.
Yeah.
I'd be interested to read something that is less explicitly message based.
Right.
So
yeah, that is our list, and that kind of concludes our first season of the show.
Yeah.
And I mean, I guess just not to belabor it too long, but I think for me, the biggest learning potential that I've gotten out of this is actually as a writer.
Yeah.
It's not an arrogance thing. It's just looking at the stuff that's out there. In a lot of ways, the bar was lower than I anticipated. Like, you don't have to be a superhero to make it happen. I mean, and in the time that we've been doing this project, both of us wrote a novel.
Right.
I think I had started mine before we actually recorded the first episode, but I mean...
Well, I mean, technically you started it like 10 years ago, but...
Well, more than that, closer to 20.
Yeah. But actually sat down and started putting words on a page in a certain order to tell a certain story.
Yeah, and if some of the books that we've read, if they can do it, you can do it. And
Nicholas Wood Smith has like 20 books out. If that motherfucker can make a name for himself as a writer with the quality of books that he put out, I mean, anyone can do it.
Yeah, and I mean the AI is not here yet. It's not even close to being able to do creative fiction.
And speaking as someone who hasn't really done a whole lot of creative writing since I was in college 20 years ago, well, 15 years ago, don't take yourself too seriously. That was my biggest thing I had to unlearn, was that I'm not sitting down trying to emulate writing Tolkien or Tolstoy or Dostoevsky. I'm writing me. I'm writing Pope Jupiter.
Yeah,
and whatever voice I write in is my voice, and I just have to make sure I'm writing a good story. Now, yes, there's certainly things things you learn and things you pick up, but if the first thing you write sounds too much like the authors you're reading, that's normal.
Yeah, and maybe the average person is probably not going to be able to just sit down and write the Ember Blade.
Right.
But you're not trying to beat the Ember Blade. You're trying to beat Part-Time Monster Hunter.
Right.
And I think the average writer is probably misjudging how polished a product has to be created.
I think too many authors are comparing themselves to Tolkien, to Jordan, and to Sanderson, especially in the fantasy realm, when those people are, deservedly or not, titans of the industry who even their biggest misses get recast as just barely as near hits. There's so much going for the analysis of those books that puts them on a level above even the skilled authors like J.C. Mackenzie, who wrote Deathmaker. The skill and talent shown in that book, I think, is leagues above anything shown in Sanderson's work.
I would agree.
But she just hasn't put out the stuff and hasn't had the opportunity, to finish one of the biggest fantasy series of all time after the author ceases to exist, like Sanderson did.
Right. Yeah, and then I guess on the other side of that coin, forcing ourselves, or at least I can speak for myself, being forced to read as many books in a relatively short amount of time as we have to record this, because of course we actually recorded most of these so that we had a lot of lead time.
Yeah, full disclosure, it is currently July 21st, 2024. We just put out our 11th episode yesterday. So the last 8 episodes that you've listened to before this haven't come out as we're recording this. We've already recorded them, obviously.
Right.
We recorded them over the last couple of months. But yeah, it's... I
mean, we were going like a book a week.
Yeah.
Including like an 800-page book.
Yeah.
1 week. And I'm ready to go. Like if it wasn't that I was having to move and start a graduate program, we would be picking the next book and going from there. I mean, is that your feeling as well?
Honestly, it's been a little bit of a loss. I don't have something that I need to be listening to.
Right.
So I catch up on my latest podcast. It's like, what do I listen to now?
Yeah, it's been enriching to read so many things that I wouldn't have read.
Absolutely.
If it wasn't for this. I might have read The Ember Blade and a couple of the other ones, but I wouldn't have read probably any of the urban fantasy.
No.
And there were, I mean, out of the top 5, there was the Mage Bike Courier and Deathmaker that were both, I mean, just absolute bangers that I'm glad that I read.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean, you have anything else to tie on the bow here?
The only other thing I'd say is that if you have a suggestion for us, send us an email, staffandtrenchcoat@gmail.com. We're on Twitter, stafftrenchcoat, or just comment here on the podcast. We'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, and then for Pope Jupiter, I'm Raymond Magdown, and we hope to see you in the next episode. Hey, thanks for listening. You can follow us on Twitter @StaffTrenchcoat. Look for us on Spotify, iTunes, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Feel free to shoot us an email at staffandtrenchcoat@gmail.com if you have a book recommendation, and we hope to see you in the next episode.